to her, Lauren. Peter McVerry, I know you were desperate to respond to the Minister there.
Yeah, we've talked a lot of figures, but the reality is the government 16 months ago introduced a plan to reduce homelessness. Every single month since then, the number of homeless people have gone up. We now have more than 2,000 people more homeless than when the plan was introduced. Any 12-year-old kid would conclude the plan isn't working. We need to go back to the drawing board. And until the government acknowledges that this plan they have isn't working, we're going nowhere. We need the government to declare a national emergency and get everybody around the table with a sense of urgency about addressing this problem. And until that happens, we're going nowhere. We're just going to see the figures going up and up and up, and hope.
Thanks, Marion. Celine was making a point there about vacant houses. Now, I know you dispute the overall figure, but there does appear to be a bit of work to be done there with vacant houses, turning them into proper homes. Peter McVerry was saying, time to declare a national emergency, time to do something, cut through the red tape and get something done on this.
Well, I mean, Selina, and I'm sorry if it sounds, distant or cold because I'm talking about statistics, but as the Minister for Housing who's got to implement the policies, I've got to make sure that we're using the right numbers so that we're getting the right policies put in place. But when those policies are put in place, they are put in place with compassion and care because they're put in place by the people around you who are funded by the taxpayer through the voluntary sector. And you did mention about the vacancy numbers. They aren't that high. And so sometimes it's important when we go down. Well, actually, when we've been doing work with vacancy teams in each of our local authorities, with my department as well, and we have a focused plan to get vacant units back into use. And just last week, I put in new changes into the planning guidelines with Damien English, so that vacant commercial space above shops in our city centres, where there's potentially 4,000 new homes to be unlocked, that people can now turn those into homes without the need for planning permission. And some of the new guidelines we published this week will allow them to put in one-bed apartments and studio apartments, the types that Father Peter wants us to see us bring in because of the number of homeless individuals that we have. I'm not against having housing as a right, but I need solutions that are going to work for people and get new homes built. And so...
Open up the homes that's already there. And Anthony, we weren't born on the streets. We are born in homes. Like
we are.
Why take them off and lock them up? Like
we are opening vacant units. And again, I don't want to return to numbers, but over 1,000 local authority vacant homes will be brought back into use this year as homes for people that they'll move into.
Sorry, Anthony.
When somebody comes off the street to take their own home, we take it back off and keep them back out onto the street and arrest them, give them a charge.
Sorry, Anthony.
Squats.
Well, I mean, I can't
just let the Minister
particular instance that you're talking about, but we need to look at solutions that are going to work, and that means building more homes. And Father Peter talks about declaring an emergency. I have the powers that I need to fix this crisis. I have the money that I need to fix this crisis. What I need is time to get those homes built. And Anthony Flynn talks about there not being enough homes built yet. There aren't being enough homes built yet. But next year, when we look at our ambitions, almost 8,000 homes through build and acquisitions and long-term leases will come into the social housing stock.
And what they want to know is when they're going to get some help from you, when they're going to get a solution from you. Are you in a position to say to somebody like Selina, you will have a permanent home by what date?
To an individual like Selina, no, I can't. But what I can say is that, thankfully, because of the supports we have been able to put in place with the Dublin Regional Homeless Executive and others, no families are sleeping rough. A hotel isn't an appropriate place for a family. We know that from all the evidence that we have and from the stories that we hear. That's why we brought out the hub programme that Brendan was talking about, where we can put around the wraparound supports for parents and children. And we have seen from our hub programme that families are moving far more quickly out of hubs into permanent homes than they were in hotels. Just earlier this week, I had the privilege to go to a new house for a new family that was provided by Respond with the local authority with funding from my own department. And they're into that house just before Christmas, and it's great for that family. And the mother was telling me about how her kids have improved, even in the space of a week or two. She's noticed their temperaments change and how they're happier. And that's very important for that family, but we have to do more work for the other families who aren't yet in homes.
Well, indeed. Now, Brendan Kenny mentioned the homeless figures for November that was published this evening just a couple of hours ago. And it showed the total of homelessness at 8,857. That's an increase of 365 in a month. That's an increase of 4%. And the number of children in homelessness, 3,333. That's an increase in 1 month of 139 children in homelessness. That's also an increase of 4% in 1 month. That's shocking.
Well, this is the difficulty that we're having, and I know people like Father Peter know all about this. We continue to see presentations, and we're not getting enough exits out of the system. If we look at the numbers that have been published for November, we have an increase in individual homelessness. Part of that is because actually in our figures we don't normally count people who are sleeping rough, but because we've actually opened new beds and brought rough sleepers into the facilities, they are now counted in those numbers. And one of the good things about that is they're now getting better supports and we hope to move them into secure accommodation.
So we couldn't believe the figures before that?
No, the figures are accurate. It's just
Except
important.
they didn't include
No, but
rough
it's important to know what's in the figures and what's not. So we have the homeless figures, and that's people who are in our emergency accommodation, and we do a separate count for people who are sleeping rough, and we publish those separately. And people who are working in this area know the distinction between those two figures. The important thing is that, though the number of individuals is up, it's because they've now come into those supports, and we hope to move them into secure accommodation. When it comes to the increase in families...
So the increase in numbers is a good thing?
No, that's not what I'm saying, David. Please don't spin it that way. What I'm saying is it's good that we can go out using our intake teams and get people who are sleeping rough into proper, supported accommodation on a temporary basis to give them the healthcare needs that they have, to try and then get them into secure accommodation and meet the other needs that they have. That's what's happening in the numbers. And if we look at families, and Brendan was alluding to this, we are seeing an increase nationally. But what we are seeing in Dublin, where we've had the greatest challenge, the number of presentations is about static, month on month. But we haven't seen as many exits in November as we should have seen, and that means we need to build more homes. We know that.
Okay.
Right now there's about 3,600 homes, social housing homes, under construction, with 2,000 more about ready to go on site.
Okay, well, we'll get back to that in a second. But just to talk about the regional thing, I was able to compare the November figures didn't come out in time, but I compared the October figures to October of last year. And there's quite an alarming, even at that stage, there's quite an alarming rise in some of the regions. Homelessness increased by 118% in the North East, by 52% in the Midlands, by 49% in the West. Now, from a smaller base, obviously. But they do suggest that this situation is spiralling out of control in other parts of the country.
No, what it tells us is that the challenges that we had been seeing in Dublin, we're now seeing elsewhere. A huge amount of work has gone in Dublin in particular, because that's where the greatest challenge was. We now need to roll those efforts out to other parts of the country, and that's why we've expanded the hub programme outside of Dublin. It's why we've also expanded our Place Finder programme outside of Dublin, and that's a preventive measure to help people into housing-assisted tenancies, to pay the 1 month's deposit, pay the first month's rent, to do those types of things to either get them out of homelessness into secure accommodation or prevent them from falling into homelessness. So all of the things that we've learnt in facing the challenge in Dublin, we are now rolling out to the regions.
OK, now in fairness, there are some good news stories. Donna MacDonald, we saw in the report, was living in a hub. She's now found permanent accommodation since that was filmed. And on the day we filmed, 5 individuals in Dublin in 2 families found a home. So they exited homelessness. Another 3 people in 2 family units were prevented from entering homelessness, which is what you've described. But 18 individuals in 5 families entered homelessness. So we're not even running to stand still. We're running and we're not keeping pace.
Well, what we would have seen in August and September is actually the number of families that were exiting homelessness was greater than the number of families entering.
But not in...
That changed again in October, November. And so we have a constant challenge here of making sure that as we have families enter into emergency accommodation, that we can move as quickly as possible to get them into secure tenancies. What that means is building more homes, and that is happening. And again, 16 new homes were opened in Coolock for 16 families just 2 weeks ago. I was on site in Fingal, where there was another 8 houses for families there as well, individuals. As these houses are built, it's important that we get them tenanted as quickly as possible, and that work is happening.